Good morning. My name is Sam. I am an alcoholic and I'm also a son of recovery. Let's start out with the Serenity Prayer. Good and gracious God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. So I'm reading through 12 Secular Steps by Bill W., and I'm on chapter 3, which is Characteristics of Addiction and of Addicts. I'm also going to divide this chapter up into two parts because it's a little long. So, to begin, I was attending an AA meeting one evening, and by chance the topic was Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. I was 5 years sober at that point, had worked all 12 steps, and had sponsored a few newcomers, yet I'd never experienced a spiritual awakening. So as I listened, I asked myself, what did I experience instead? It was then that I realized I grew up through this process. That is an idea that he has used that resonates with me. Even though have a higher power and I'm not secular, I really love that idea of I grew up. That resonates with me a lot. This epiphany required a little humility, as I was in my 40s at the time. Regardless of my age, the 12-step fellowship helped me recover and rebuild the abilities to restrain impulsive behavior, to use good judgment, and to have a sense of responsibility toward myself and others. Pretty much what we're talking about here is maturity. It is not my intention in this chapter to humiliate addicts by labeling them as immature and childish. Addiction is a serious, chronic, often fatal disease. I would no more say to a fellow addict, just stop and grow up, than I would tell a person who suffered a paralyzing stroke that they should just grow up and walk and talk like an adult. I believe that in both cases, a physical pathology affects the brain, and this pathology directly results in a loss of function and skills. These skills, whether they be physical in the case of a stroke or cognitive and behavioral in the case of an addiction, can partially or wholly be recovered through a structured rehabilitation process. Addiction recovery is similar to physical rehabilitation. We reviewed in the last chapter how an addict's mind is physically modified and essentially reprogrammed during the progression of addiction. Social and decision-making skills wither as a result. Logically, the goals of addiction recovery should go beyond abstinence and address the revival of these life skills. 12-step programs have always had this focus. Not a single step explicitly tells us to be abstinent. What the steps do offer is a flexible pathway to psychological rehabilitation. To summarize, we will benefit if we work steps that include assessing our behavioral strengths and deficits. Step 4, for example, is an inventory where we do just that. Once our assessments have identified the problems, we use follow-up steps to take actions toward the resolutions. Recovery in this way goes beyond abstinence. We learn a better way to live. Happiness, or at least contentment, is the real end goal of recovery, just as it is with childhood. That is a phenomenal statement. Recovery in this way goes beyond abstinence. We learn a better way to live. I love that. Childhood has a purpose. So this section is called Psychological Foundations, the Shared Goals of Childhood and Recovery. Childhood has a purpose. It is a development stage during which we shape our knowledge of the world, our social skills, and our character. With the help of parents and others, children build the emotional, social, and cognitive foundations that enable them to move beyond the dependency of early childhood and come onto the independence and accountability of adulthood. During this transition, the brain physically changes at an amazing rate. Childhood development is, in a sense, our original programming. Addiction is a subsequent pathological reprogramming, one that impacts the mind like a virus infecting a computer. That is very interesting. I think it's insightful to see how the process of maturation and addiction move in opposite directions. While childhood development directs us away from a self-centered dependency and toward a reasoned self-reliance, addiction moves toward increasing dependency, increasing self-centeredness, and a profound loss in the ability to make good decisions. Addicts eventually even lose the ability to correct behavior based on consequences. As part of recovery, we need to restore the skills we hopefully established during childhood. If we did not fully develop these in childhood, 12-step work offers a second chance to do so. An overview of normal psychological development. To understand the pathological characteristics of addiction, it is useful to first examine the normal characteristics and processes established during early human development. Below, I've summarized the emotional, cognitive, and social characteristics associated with a hypothetically healthy progression through the broad development stages of infancy, early childhood, young adulthood, and finally mature adulthood. After we complete this very generalized description of mental programming associated with growing up, we'll look at the characteristics associated with the early, middle, and late phases of addiction's progression. Infancy. Infancy is a time of dependence on others to meet our basic needs, both physical and emotional. During infancy, the limbic midbrain is largely in control, which means infantile behaviors and processes are built upon reflex and innate drives. These are immediately operational at birth and require minimal decision-making abilities. Life is simple. Oddly enough, we can see some similarity between limbic dominance of infancy and that of advanced addiction. Infantile cycle: experience hunger, stress, then cry, behavior, get food with dopamine reward, wait until hunger returns, and repeat. Addictive cycle: crave, stress, seek drug, behavior, use drug to get high, large dopamine reward, craving returns, and repeat. Where the infant has a complete dependency on big people to meet needs, the addict has a complete dependency on mood-altering chemicals and enablers. The complexity of this stage is early childhood. The complexity of this stage is astounding. During early childhood, we begin the gradual shift from midbrain dominance, reactive and reflexive, to frontal lobe dominance, reason and judgment. Through a progressive process that starts with parental guidance, including rewards and punishments, we develop rule-based ethics and behavioral controls, and thus begins our acquisition of positive social skills. Children at this stage also begin to gradually form their self-image, their inner consciousness, and their inner voice. Simultaneously, they are gaining more experience of the world around them and are beginning to learn constructive coping skills, often by mimicking those of the adults around them. During this phase, they are not even remotely ready for complete independence. They need instruction, practice, and feedback in order to create the values and skill sets necessary for successful young adulthood. Despite the lingering dependence, cognitive and behavioral development is rapidly taking place as the cortex becomes increasingly programmed and complex. I loosely compare this stage to the first months of sobriety. During this time, it is best for the newcomer to trust in the instructions and suggestions of an experienced sponsor or friend, etc., rather than relying exclusively on their own decisions. We will cover more practical details on this topic in Chapter 5. For now, it will suffice to say that decades of 12-step experience have confirmed that a willingness to surrender control, especially during the first 90 days, is often necessary to initially break the ongoing cycle of active addiction. When we are humble enough to accept this level of help, we make ourselves available to the wisdom and strategies that have proven effective for so many who have recovered before us. Benchmarks and characteristics of early childhood. Emotional. Predominantly egocentric, self-centered, dependent, impulsive. Frequently acts out on emotional responses to here-now events. Develops rule-based control of behavior through punishment, reward, reinforcement. Initially develops ability to recognize, respond to emotional states of others. Cognitive. Tremendous progress in language skills. Develops self-awareness and self-image. Internalizes beliefs and behavior patterns largely based on imitation of others or acceptance of knowledge based on the authoritative status of the source, and develops elementary coping skills and problem-solving capabilities. Social. Develops social skills and ability to consider the emotions of others. Develops motivation to achieve positive social outcomes. a behavior that indicates creation of social drives. Children are widely diverse in individual personalities and social styles. Though early childhood is certainly characterized by an innocence of honesty, young children also learn to manipulate others to get what they want. With good parenting, they develop awareness of these self-centered tendencies and keep these in check through evolving emotional and social maturity. When self-centeredness continues in adulthood and amplifies itself through addiction or sociopathy, it becomes a profound defect of character. Many addicts tend to be egocentric, and many of us overexpress this trait even before active addiction. We tend to view others in terms of their usefulness to our desires. We habitually manipulate others, and at the same time, we have a poorly developed awareness of our self-centered motivations and actions. In the second phase of step work, especially steps 4 through 9, we address this lack of awareness and take steps to establish or reestablish a value system, principles, to correct these issues. Young adulthood. Normal trends in young adulthood distinctly show that the prefrontal cortex, the rational brain, is gaining predominance, but these processes are often in conflict with strong emotion-based midbrain limbic influences. Young people should have acquired the skills to handle crisis with emotional control and solid decision-making skills during this phase if they are to become adults with these skills. I tend to think of the first 2 years of recovery beyond our initial months of abstinence as comparable to this phase. We should have completed an initial round of 12-step work during this time frame and made progress toward reestablishing effective decision-making skills and social habits. In other words, we do and say the right things most of the time. We begin to reap the benefits of our lives as a result. These new rewards reinforce our behaviors, which in turn builds sustained motivation. But we still have bad days. We can get through these sober. We've gained sufficient skills for that. Normal drives are back online, and we are in a phase of rapidly progressing personal growth. Characteristics of young adulthood. Emotional. Driven toward independence, more likely to take risks, increases mastery of control over emotional overall, but experiences emotional swings and periods of self-absorption. Experiences emotional states not grounded in here and now, such as resentment, past, and anxiety, future. Social anxiety and susceptible to peer judgment and pressure. Cognitive. Works to establish self-identity, expands beyond family and local perspective, becomes interested in diverse people and ideas, develops an intellectual system of values, and may become idealistic. Depending on educational, social, and economic factors, there are very diverse levels of intellectual development. Social. Peer interactions affect self-esteem, continues development of complex communication skills, takes on increased levels of responsibilities, explores romantic relationships, develops ethics based on consequences to self and others. Mature adult. The ability to habitually subjugate limbic processes, selfish, emotional-based, to cortex-based processes, adaptive, reasoned, is essential characteristic of this phase of development. These characteristics represent successful development of a person in or out of recovery. This stage of development is a secular equivalent of a spiritual awakening in the traditional steps. Emotional. Strength-based in a stable emotional life, right-sized perception of importance of self in relation to others. Effective coping skills and strategies, assumes responsibility for the well-being of others, appropriately developed self-will, self-image, self-esteem. Cognitive. Adults are very diverse in their mastery of complex subjects. Many become more dogmatic with increasing age. Well-developed personal ethics created by and integrated with personal experience, drawn toward universal principles that are simple yet effective. Social. History of successfully taking on challenges of parenting, career, and other responsibilities. Highly skilled communication and problem-solving abilities. Desire to make positive contributions in the lives of others, including those outside close family social web. Here we end the hypothetical progression through our early development, but before we go on to the characteristics linked with addiction progression, we will briefly consider a few factors that strongly link childhood and addiction, and that is where we're going to stop today. So tomorrow I will pick up with childhood risk factors for addiction. But again, I know sometimes the sciencey stuff can be a little boring, but man, like I think there is something really, really honestly here that can still be linked with spiritual stuff. But I love how he's describing this and about growing up, maturity, of you know, of actually like going through developmental stages again through recovery. I have never thought about it this way. I'm sure others have, obviously he has, but I'm sure even some in traditional 12-step programs have thought about it in this way, and I think it's really, really awesome. So, yay, can't wait to continue. So, let's see. We're going to do a prayer about my family, because I'm going to go get to see my family this weekend, and I haven't seen my older sister in almost 2 years, so I'm pretty excited about that. So this prayer is called My Family. Help me accept the potent emotions I may feel toward family members. Help me be grateful for the lessons they are teaching me. I accept the golden light of healing that is now shining on me and my family. I thank God that healing does not always come in a neat, tidy package. And that is the truth. So, as always, if you have any comments, questions, or thoughts, please leave them. And I hope you have a blessed day. Thank you.